when you say defending Australia, what do you mean by that? Do you mean defending it in its region and the continent itself, or do you mean defending it possibly in foreign fields? What do you mean when you say concentrating on defending Australia?
Yeah, and this is the subject of a very recently published, and I think excellent book by Professor Hugh, now Emeritus Professor Hugh White, on how to defend Australia, which takes us back to the sort of first principles. The premise is that we're in a world situation where we can or we should, perhaps more importantly, no longer rely for our national security on a great and powerful friend. We were there once before, and it didn't serve us well when the chips were down. In that case, because our great and powerful friend was not able to come to our aid. We might face a circumstance in the near future where our great and powerful friend is not willing to come to our aid. In either case, I think the maturity of the nation should be such that we contemplate defending ourselves against direct threats and the sorts of direct threats that might arise to what our national interests are. We ought to be focusing our thoughts on how do we do that a little more by ourselves, because we may have to. Now that might mean a whole bunch of very unpalatable things, but as Hugh White does, if you come back to what are our key national interests that we would fight to defend, and start from that position, firstly understanding what our key national interests are, and then which of those, because there'll be probably more than we can defend, or more than we can ever afford to defend, which of those are we going to fight for? What do we really believe in, and what are we prepared to fight for, rather than what seems to be the case, and many would say, when the US decides to go into something and is looking for a coalition partner, Australia is generally there, which it has been. That's formed the backbone of what we've considered to be contributing to our broader national security. But in a new world, and this new world is here, it's not coming, it's here, where those circumstances strategically could be very much more challenging for us. What might we be able to do that would deter aggression against Australia? To defend Australia itself, the territories and people of Australia, and to do that in a way which doesn't obviously break the bank, because we've still got to do it within the budget framework.
It sounds as though somewhere in there there'll need to be a balance between being self-reliant and engaging cooperating with our allies. How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, and that's a real challenge without any doubt. Hugh White discusses it, I think, exceptionally well, looking at what the options are. And I don't think that there's any notion that against an aggressor intent on invading Australia, which is probably the highest risk to us but the least likelihood of occurring, because it's very, very difficult. The Japanese actually couldn't do it during World War II. They could not logistically sustain an invasion of Australia, and we now know that they didn't plan to do one either. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, to invade Australia. We have some natural, geographically based defensive strengths that we should maximise. But nonetheless, what we'd really like to do is deter people from considering other things that could be done as well to interfere with Australia. And some of those lead you to conclusions about what we could do, what we should do, what might create a sufficient deterrent effect to stop a potential adversary of any sort. And key amongst that, of course, is we need to consider how we go about making friends in our region. I mean, I think you would look at Australia's relationship with Indonesia and say, we actually haven't done all that well consistently over a very long period of time, which is probably okay when the nation, albeit the most populous Muslim nation on earth, is much less economically powerful than we are. Well, that's not going to be the case. Now it's going to be much more powerful than us in an economic sense. And so the approach that we should take to them perhaps should be a little better. Some recently would say, and I think fairly, Australia's diplomatic efforts, particularly in our region, have not been as polished as at some other times in the past. And we need to get back to understanding how to do diplomacy well in a very much more complex, potentially volatile set of strategic circumstances.